Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, Bill Cannon. I'm a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. I retired as a sergeant out of Manhattan North Homicide Squad, and we're going to cover some things tonight. It's impossible for us to ignore the national news, but I have a great guest on tonight. He's a retired detective, Phil Grimaldi. He worked not most of his career, but a large chunk of his career in the 6-0 squad, and he finished up his career in Intel. And he was a 9/11 first responder. I believe he's a recipient of the Combat Cross, and he retired as a second grade detective. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Thanks very much, Bill. Thank you for having me back again.
I had to have you back, man. Everyone said, who was that guy? Who was that Joe Pesci-looking guy you had on the show the last time?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
I said, it's Phil Grimaldi. They said, oh, he's a natural storyteller. I go, I know, so I'll have him back on,
I appreciate that. That's very nice to hear. It's very nice to hear.
So, there's been, in the last couple of days, there's been some disturbing occurrences in regards to active shooters. We had the one in Atlanta who chose massage parlors, and at first the press tried to really sell it as a bias incident against Asian people. But when the investigation was it's still ongoing, but what the investigators found out that he was sort of like a sex addict and a religious zealot, and those two things collided into each other. And it's almost like he was killing people that were part of these massage parlors. He killed 2 white people and 6 Asian people. So they couldn't really claim that this was a bias incident. You have any thoughts about that, Phil?
Well, I think it's actually very shameful that the media, as you know, they don't tell the real story. They get a narrative and then they pump it and pump it and pump it. And if you watched the actual, live press conference, or you got some of the details as we do from law enforcement sources, you know that the facts are not what they're putting on the 6 o'clock news and the 11 o'clock news. They're trying to make it an anti-Asian bias, which, as you stated, some of the people weren't of Asian descent. And, not that I want to knock any of the victims, these were massage parlors. He obviously frequented them for sexual reasons. And so the guy's obviously a psychopath. Tell the story the way it is. I think that when they lie and they say that, this is anti-Asian bias related to COVID, and they want to point at the previous administration for calling it the China virus or whatever, that's really not doing anyone any good. And I think what it does do, it maybe inflames people who do have these biases even more, and possibly could trigger someone to do something like what this guy did. And it's horrible. Listen, I've said this before, I'll say it again. Any kind of bias, physical violence towards people, whether it be for bias, religion, race, creed, color, whatever it is, obviously is unacceptable, period. That's what we have to get across. I don't care if a person is Chinese and because of the Wuhan coronavirus, whatever, you should not attack them. They didn't bring it here. Obviously, the government of China was responsible. And, so we really got to get that message across. And the media does a disservice by not doing that. Call it what it is. Obviously, it's a tragedy. It's a shame. And this guy was a psycho. And, they latch onto it because it fits their narrative. And politics gets in the middle of it. And I think Joe Fox, who you had on last night, was saying some things similar to that the media and they're doing a disservice to the United States of America. And, I wish there was a way to prevent it, but unfortunately, I think we just have to keep repeating ourselves.
Phil, it is disturbing that the media grabs onto a certain narrative, and even if it's not true, they push this narrative, and then they try to make it fit. I think you should really listen to who the investigators are and what the investigators are saying. In fact, I believe in the Atlanta situation, the governor even got mad at the public relations captain for insisting that it wasn't a bias incident, as if she wanted it to be that anti-Asian bias type crime when they the investigation had turned up other things, that he was obviously a sick individual, but he was a sort of a religious zealot. He belonged to some really strict, I think, Baptist church, and they wouldn't allow sex before marriage. So he was so conflicted with his needs going to these massage parlors that it seemed like he wanted to kill the very thing that was, satisfying his needs.
Yeah, I mean, it's just all around a sad situation. As we both stated, he was a psychopath. But there are times I notice when things are released to the media, sometimes I agree with a quick, statement to the media about specific facts on things to maybe quell tensions, like in these, these biased or alleged bias incidents against police-involved deaths and stuff. Maybe putting stuff out there quickly is inflammatory, and other times maybe it's not. Certain facts could come out right away, and it might help. And but the media just seems to throw it all out there. They don't hold back on anything. They're itching, and then, like you said, they run with a lie. They'll say something that's absolutely 100% not true, and they'll keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. It's going out to millions and millions of people. And then people walk around and they start repeating the lie, and the lie becomes the truth at some point.
100%. The other thing is that they always want to find out motive. And you're a homicide investigator, and you don't always find out motive. It's important because people want to hear the reason, But in that Las Vegas shooting, which has got to be a couple of years ago, they still don't know what the motive to that was.
Yeah, there was a media blackout with that specific shooting that you're talking about. I do remember that, where they really held back, I think, in my opinion, more than they should have. But as you said, there really hasn't been a motive confirmed. The guy was obviously homicidal, but very intricate in what he did in Vegas. I mean, he was loaded for war, and he set up surveillance cameras in the hallway. So he really... he was committed, and he had a mission, and unfortunately a lot of people paid with their lives in that case. But there's so many things we can talk about, and so many things we can try to do.
Well, Phil, I don't want to spend the whole night on this, so let's move over to the other one that occurred in Boulder, Colorado.
Yes.
And let's talk about that a little bit, where he sort of just went into a supermarket and just started killing people.
Yeah, and police officer Eric Tully responded. I believe he was the first officer there, and he was shot and killed. And our hearts go out to him, and our deepest condolences to him and his family. He had 7 children, as you probably heard in the media. I mean, that's horrible. And then all the other victims. I don't know. To me, they're looking at possibly maybe it being a type of terrorism. I don't think it was bias at this point. There's no indication of that. But again, it's too early to say too much. I mean, the media is all over it, and they really haven't released a lot about it. But our hearts to those families. Deepest respect for Police Officer Tully and his family, and all of the victims.
The big issue that always comes back with all these active shooter things is gun control. And where did he get the guns that he did this with? And apparently the gun was an AR-15-like pistol with a pistol stock. And he bought it 6 days ago. So that's the question. Was he mentally capable to buy a firearm like that? And would have background checks that would have made him wait 3-4 days, would that have stopped him from obtaining this gun?
Well, I also heard, I don't know if it's true, it was reported that he had a criminal record. So with a criminal record, I would think in most states, the minute you apply for a firearm, that it should pop. Maybe there was some kind of a screw up there where he was able to gain access to a firearm and ammunition when he shouldn't have. There was also stories in the news, early reports that he was depressed and he had issues, antisocial behavior, things like that. So these are all the things they're going to have to look into. And I'm sure they're going to do a deep dive into his social media. If he had any computer friends, they'll talk to family. And I think that they'll probably, since he is alive, they'll probably come up with a motive for this horrible tragedy.
You know, they tried to say, or in some of the reports that I read, that he was teased a lot in high school for his Muslim name, and that he took that all. And I was like, stop with that crap. All right. I was teased in high school too, and so were you, you know. And we didn't go to a supermarket and kill 10 people, you know.
Yeah, that's. I think those are people that are, trying to make a something out of nothing. We don't know. It's really not fair to come up and draw a conclusion till all the facts are in. I mean, we can look at things at the surface and maybe, have an idea of what we think it is, but it's really unfair to say 100% one way or the other whether this guy had bias motive, terrorist motive, or he was just a plain old, crazy out of his mind,
Phil, before we get into your case, which I'm raring to do, I just want to shout out to some of our live chat people. Of course, the Pranzos are here, Lieutenant Peter Pranzo and his wife Rachella, Bill Ryan, MC's Audio, Tim Acosta, Kathy Schumacher, Robert Lerner, Sandra H., how are you? Vinny Falsita, Nick Grimm, Melody McAtee, Seth Hansen, who else? Boxing MMA, all the way from England. And
England in the house.
Yeah, we got the English people here too. 12-Step Woman, K-Jack Images, thank you so much for that $9.99 super chat. Joey Brooklyn, what up, Joey? You know Philly's from Brooklyn too. So we're all at home here. We're all Garden Girl, how are you? What else we got? I think I pretty much covered everyone. 12-Step Woman, thank you so much for that $4.99 super chat. You're keeping me in business here. Sam DeFiglia, my buddy Sammy, how you doing? Great to see you. It's great to see some of the blasts from the past, friends of mine that I feel like whenever I say friends of mine, I want to say friends of ours, like we're made guys,
That's
if I say they were friends of ours, it means they were cops, When they're friends of mine, they just could be anybody,
Yeah. He's a friend.
You know the way that made guy stuff goes, right?
Yeah. Well, I grew up around it. I sure do know how it goes. But
that's great.
But I just
we're here tonight with the retired NYPD detective Phil Grimaldi. He worked in the 60 squad. He was a transit cop. He's a Combat Cross recipient, and he retired as a second grade detective. I didn't mean to interrupt him. Philly, go ahead. You got the floor.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to. I know we talked a lot about the police shootings recently, and I just wanted to make one point. You had Joe on last night, Chief Joe Fox, who I worked with in 7-0 back in the day, and great guy. He touched on a little bit. I had a conversation with the chief of detectives last week when I went to Jimmy Luongo's walkout. Chief Jimmy Luongo, congratulations on your retirement. But I had a conversation with Chief Harrison, and he was saying how the media is not reporting anything but bad about the police department in New York City. Across his desk every day, kilos of coke being recovered in an arrest, old homicide case being, arrest being made and being solved, current stuff being solved, and it just doesn't make the papers. I just wanted to say that to the police department, current members. You guys are doing a great job. Hang in there. It's a tough time, but the job is getting done, even though you're not getting the proper recognition. The good people of the city are behind you.
Phil, we all hope that. And, we've had so many different guests on this show. And I remember, I keep bringing this up, Randy Jurgensen, who wrote The Circle of Six. And he was on the job in 1972, 73. And he had told us back then in the 2.5, the 2.8, and the 3.2, there were 500 murders a year. Could you imagine that? And 10 police assassinations of NYPD cops a year. So although we think these are the bleakest times, they've had some bleak times in the past too.
Yes, absolutely, Bill. It seems to run in, peaks and valleys where, there's a quiet period and then there's a very active period. We're in a very active anti-police period right now, but hopefully we'll get through it and the city will come back.
I hope so. So, Phil, you're going to talk about a homicide case that you investigated back, I believe, 1993 in the 60 squad?
Yes. 1993, I guess it was somewhere the warmer weather had kicked in. I guess we were towards the summer, and we got a call. It was a Saturday morning, I remember. we got a call that there was a parent DOA victim of a gunshot wound over on West 19th Street between Neptune Avenue and the Bay. Coney Island is obviously an island. There's the Bay side, the ocean side. This was on the Bay side, and the Bay side wasn't well kept. There was a lot of pollution there and debris and stuff. And this was a dead end block, and there was abandoned cars, old, a lot of garbage, old tires and stuff. So when we get to the scene, every time there's a homicide investigation that starts in the NYPD, a lot happens that people don't realize. You don't see it on Law and Order or NYPD Blue or any of these cop shows. There's notifications made right from the beginning. I mean, when the 911 call happened, I believe it was a dog walker found the body and called the police. So naturally, the police respond. They notify the patrol supervisor and the duty captain. And there's some other things that go on. Crime scene's notified. So by the time the detectives, we get there, some things the wheels have already started turning. So we get to the location, and the victim, who was a male Hispanic, probably in his early 30s, he was handcuffed from behind, laying face down with his head was turned to the left. He apparently had been shot in the head. There was a gunshot wound to the back of his head. And it looked like he had some trauma to his facial area, maybe his lip, his cheek. Looked like it happened pre being killed. So we did a careful check of the area. We did recover a shell casing at the scene. But there was also something that was very telling. Right next to his head, maybe 6 inches to 12 inches away from his head, was a dead rat, a very large rat.
That's a Sicilian message, I think.
Well, we were looking at that. Was it just an ordinary dump job, or was it a dump job with a message? So, he's handcuffed, he's shot in the head, typical maybe mob style type crime scene, dump job. And now there's a dead rat next to him. So, we did everything that we would normally do at the crime scene. A crime scene came and they photographed everything. They recovered the ballistic evidence, which was the shell casing. They took the handcuffs off the guy, did prints on the handcuffs, which there were no prints recovered. They bagged his hands. And then his body was taken out to the morgue. When we returned back to the squad, let me back up a little bit. In homicide investigation, the scene is usually, does give some direction or evidence. This particular case, we were kind of like stumped because, like I said, was it a mob hit? Was it a dump job with a message? Or was it something else? We really didn't know too much, at the time. There wasn't a lot of evidence. Like I said, there was just a shell casing. It was an industrial area. There wasn't many witnesses around. There was no video cameras or anything like that. It's like a factory type area. I guess you would call it industrial.
Now, Phil, based on the fact that the spent shell casing was on the scene, did you feel that he was shot at that location?
Yes, we felt that he was shot at the location.
But there was probably another crime scene, maybe where he was beaten up and handcuffed and maybe tortured because he had some other signs of that he was hit a few times, right?
Yes, Bill, absolutely. That's a good point. It looked like he had been brought to that location and shot there. Now, he was obviously handcuffed, so he's probably handcuffed previously. The signs on his face told us that he may have been beaten up. So you're right. You make a good point that maybe there was another crime scene, but this was the dump of the victim. So there wasn't very many areas to canvass for witnesses. The nearest house was probably a block and a half away. We did have a person who was walking a dog that found the body. They were interviewed, really didn't have anything to add. And then the normal routine of interviewing the first officer, interviewing EMS who comes in. And that's one of the other things that's done in homicide investigation. Someone with a medical background has to pronounce the victim dead. So EMS is always called and they pronounce him dead. So we interview them. Sometimes there are cases where before we even get to the scene, evidence could be accidentally moved or displaced. So that's why we want to, very important to have everyone interviewed or know who was at that crime scene, maybe for print analysis and elimination. things like that. So those are all very important factors.
Well, some of the things that, and I'm not trying to one up you, but some of the other things that you look at the condition of the body, is it in rigor mortis, which would indicate how long has the person been dead, temperature of the body, which is taken every time by medical legal investigators, and that can tell you somewhat how long the person's been dead, except if the body's outside and the temperature's freezing, then the body temperature is going to drop very quickly. But there's those little things, a petechial hemorrhaging right to the eyes can tell you whether or not the person died of asphyxia, right? Possibly bleeding from the mouth. There's all types of medical indications.
Yes, that's all correct, Bill. Obviously, you've got that from your experience in these type of murders and cases. To us, at the point, it looked like he had been only shot and dumped within hours. It was not really the middle of summer. It was warmer weather, though. So the warmer weather does speed up the process of rigor mortis and stuff like that. But from the medical examiner and from crime scene, we all felt that he had been dumped within hours of being found. So we were looking at a fresh, what we would call a fresh homicide. You know, in a body that's left outside, it doesn't take long for maggots to begin to form and things like that, and flies. And none of that really had taken place yet. And so there wasn't a whole lot of direction just based on the crime scene. But however, when we got back to the precinct, naturally, when a person is unidentified, a missing persons report is prepared and transmitted. And missing persons compared it to any missing persons that they had reported in the last day. And sure enough, there was a Queens case, actually a Brooklyn North case, I'm sorry, where a kidnapping had occurred. And they said that the male that we had fit the description. We put our heads together, we faxed them a photo, whatever, and they confirmed through the victim's girlfriend that this was the guy who had been kidnapped previously the night before. So naturally, we went out to Brooklyn North Homicide, and they supplied us with a lot of information that actually was very instrumental in the conclusion of this case. And what they told us is that the victim was coming home maybe about 1 o'clock in the morning. His girlfriend, who lived in a private house, but she was up on the second floor, she heard the car and she looked out the window and she saw him getting out of the car, and he was like parking across the street and down the block a little bit. A van pulls up, 4 guys jump out and they force him into the van. So she naturally...
That's never a good sign.
No, that's actually a very bad sign, especially for this young man that was kidnapped. So she tries, there were no cell phones back in 93. Well, there were, but they weren't really prevalent, but he had a beeper. So she starts beeping him. He doesn't return the call. She calls the police. The police in turn notify Night Watch. It's the middle of the night. And Night Watch responds. They get the story from her and they put a tape recorder on her phone and they tell her to start paging him every few minutes to see if maybe there's going to be a ransom demand, since he apparently had been kidnapped. So this went on for a while. And then about 4 a.m., the phone rings and she picks up the phone. Now, the guys from Night Watch are listening in on an extension. They have the tape recording going, and she says hello, and a male voice, it's not her boyfriend on the other end of the phone, says, "Are you looking for Hutchie?" That was the victim's nickname, Hutchie. So he says, "Are you looking for Hutchie?" And she says, yeah. Where is he? Is he all right? And the guy calls out, "Hutchie." He calls out a few times, "Hutchie, Hutchie." And you can hear some voices and shuffling in the background on this tape. And then the victim gets on the phone and she says to him, "Hutchie, are you okay? And he says, yeah, I'm all right. I'm fine. Everything's good." "Where are you? What happened? What happened?" And he says to her, "I'm with Musiquita." Now, I didn't know what it meant at the time, but there was a Spanish-speaking detective. This meant music in Spanish, and she took it to mean he was with his friend who was a DJ. So she didn't know the guy's whole name. She only knew his first name. She didn't know his whereabouts. But he said, "I'm with Musiquita," meaning that he was with the DJ. So she now was slightly relieved that he was okay. He went on to tell her, "Listen, I got a package," and it was allegedly 2 ounces of cocaine. Later on, we found out that he was involved in narcotics distributing. So he tells her, I have a package in the bureau. I want you to take it out, and I'm going to send somebody to get it. And at that point, she realizes that the police are listening in on the line, and she stops him. And in Spanish, she tells him, don't talk about that on the phone. The police are listening in. Well, they had somebody listening in on their extension, and the phone call hangs up, and they not to be heard from again. So they were able to recover a phone number, and that phone number came back to a location in I believe it was in Long Island, just south or just east of Kennedy Airport.
You know, Phil, back then it was a big deal to be able to trace a phone call to a location, right?
Yes, I think she had caller ID on her phone. I said Long Island, I meant Queens. This started out in Brooklyn North, and that's where he was kidnapped from, and that's where she lived. But they took him to a location in Queens, which was right near JFK. So they took the phone number, and they were able to do a Coles check on it, and they had an address, and they had responded there. And the apartment, it was a 2-family house. The apartment was empty, but there was signs of little few droplets of blood. And so we knew, they knew at the time that this was actually the location where the phone call was made from. So then we took a copy of the taped phone call. We went back to the apartment. We found the landlord, and we asked him who lived there, and he gave us the person's name and stuff. And he said he hadn't seen him. Now, this was Saturday. This all occurred Friday night into Saturday. This was like Saturday afternoon now. And he said he hadn't seen him since Thursday. So we said, listen, we want you to call us if he does come back. And we gave him a business card and said, have him call us, but we'd like you to call us first when he does come back. So that's how we left off with him. We get back to the precinct. Now it's Saturday afternoon, and a few, maybe an hour or two later, several agents from alcohol, tobacco, and firearms walk in, and they ask us about this homicide. And we say, yeah, and they knew the victim's name. And so now they had a very distraught look. One of the agents specifically who seemed very upset about it. So what is this about? Why are you asking about this? And they tell us, they said the victim in this case, Hutchie, was a confidential informant for them, and he had been working with them for quite some time, and they had developed information where they actually had him purchase guns, hand grenades. He was a very important witness for their investigations, and he was deep in with them. He had been working with them for a while. They had picked up on him. They probably flipped him during a narcotics investigation, and he knew about gun sales and hand grenades and stuff like that. So they utilized him. Now, they were very concerned that he was compromised as an informant, and that's why he was killed. So we worked together. They gave us whatever they had on it, and we kept them, informed on what we were going to be doing. And now the motive shifted from, was it a dump job? Was it a organized crime hit? Was it, a message? We were looking really, strongly that this guy was compromised, and they killed him, and they put the dead rat there to send him out.
Yeah, I mean, Phil, you had so many signs of that. I mean, you had the guy who was handcuffed.
Right.
And then he had a dead rat by his head. That's sort of implying that he was, he was talking, to the wrong people.
Right. So now we had an all-out investigation going, working with ATF and our office, the 60 Squad in the Brooklyn South Homicide. By the way, I was assigned to the case with a detective by the name of Tony Angotti, who passed a few years back from 9/11 related cancer. But Tony was a great guy, a great investigator. We had such great talent in our office as well as in the homicide squad. So I was only a detective a few years at that point. Tony had more time on the job than me. And so I was confident that we were going to be able to work this case and come to a good conclusion, So as we started out with what we were doing, the next day, first thing in the morning, we get a call from the landlord of that apartment, and he tells us about this individual who lived in the apartment came back. And he said to him, the police were here, what happened? And he says, I don't know, I was away since Thursday. So we said, did you give him our card? And he says, yeah, he's going to call you in a few minutes. Sure enough, he calls. And we said, listen, we need to talk to you in the precinct. Do you want us to come and get you? He says, no, I can get out to you guys. So he comes into the precinct. And we bring him up to the squad. We put him in the interview room, and we start asking him questions about, his whereabouts and if he knew, the victim by name or anything like that. And he actually was sounding very believable. He wasn't nervous. He didn't show any signs of being edgy or anything like that. He was very compliant in the questions. And his story is that he left on Thursday to go visit family in the Bronx, and that he came back Sunday morning and found his apartment in disarray. And his assertion is that someone had broken in, and whatever occurred, he had no idea about it. He claimed he didn't know the victim. He didn't know, anything about him or anything like that. So we go over the story a few times, and previously I had listened to the tape with Tony numerous times, trying to hear something in the background, trying to hear maybe a name or a voice that would have been familiar to the girl or familiar to someone that knew the victim. And so I really had it in my head. I must have listened to it 15 or 20 times. Now, as he's talking, a bell just went off in my head, and I realized that his voice was the voice on the tape that called the victim's girlfriend and said, "Are you looking for Hutchie?" So without saying anything to Tony Angotti, I just got up. He said, "Where you going?" I said, "I'll be right back." I went into the boss's office. I got the tape recorder with the recording, with the tape, and I set it to the point right where the phone call takes place. I came back in the room. Tony looked at me like I was crazy because it hadn't clicked to him yet that this was the same guy. So I take the tape recorder, and I kind of got in his face, and I hit play on the tape recorder. And as the recording started to play, I could see the blood draining from his face, and he became almost gray. And the minute that the tape was over, I slammed my hand on the desk, and I got right in his face, and I said, "That's you, and you're going to jail for 25 to life." Well, Tony looked at me like I was crazy. He was like taken back by it. And then it clicked in his head that this was the guy. And
was that the face you looked at him with?
Yeah, something like that, but probably a little more angrier, like I really got in his face. And that was my technique, that when I knew I was at the turning point, I would either hit the desk or bang something. And I really shock and awed him, you know what I mean? And the color ran out of his face. And he just, and Tony said, "That's you, we know you're involved in this." And he said, "Okay, fellas, I'm going to tell you everything." And then he proceeded to tell us about this whole plot.
And what was it about? What was the plot about? Was it about the drugs, or was it about him being a rat?
Well, the plot really turned out to be that this particular individual was a narcotics distributor. He was involved, heavily. He was a player in the drug business, and one or two people involved in it knew him. So the main guy was a real bad guy. He was a predicate felon. He was the one that had the gun. He was the one that put the whole plot together. And he enlisted these three other friends that were friends with our witness, that we eventually made him a witness in the case, whose house it was that they brought the victim to. And the plan was this. Here was the plan. They were going to rent a van over by the airport. They were going to lay in wait for this particular victim, Hutchie. They were going to kidnap him and then exchange him for the narcotics. Obviously, the plan went awry when they were on the phone and they were listening, and the girlfriend said that the police are on the line, don't talk about it. And they knew that at that point they had to leave the apartment, and they decided to kill Hutchie. He walked us through the whole thing, and he said that during the time that they were in the apartment, they slapped him around a little bit, and he eventually said, "Okay, I'll make the call." They told him, "We wanted you to call. We want the drugs. We know you got the drugs." And when he saw that he wasn't getting out of it, they had him handcuffed. They were beating him up. He complied, and he went along with the phone call. And when they did the grab and all, there were four individuals as well as our witness, who was the driver. And, it wasn't a really well-hatched plan. I mean, he rented the car in his own name, and, they did the grab with these three other guys. But he wound up supplying us with the names and where we could find all but the main individual. The main individual was a little bit more. We had to do some work on him. But so we brought him to the district attorney's office. He was polygraphed. He was believable. His only involvement in the case was, from what he told us at the time, was that he was part of the plan, that he rented the van. He let them use his apartment. He didn't plan on hurting the victim or anything like that. And, the plan was hatched just to get this 2 kilos of cocaine and obviously resell it. And there was going to be some money in it for him. So when things went sideways, they drove to Coney Island to West 19th Street. They took him out of the car. They shot him in the head, and then they went back. And he figured, let me leave the apartment in case they can trace the call. And he stood away for a few days. Like I was saying, when we brought him to the district attorney's office, we presented the whole thing to the DA's office, and they were in agreement to make this person a witness as opposed to a perpetrator, so that, we had a case where there were no witnesses. It was a desolated area. There was no ballistic evidence recovered other than the shell casing. There was no gun or anything like that. So the decision was made to make him a witness, which we did. Since
Phil, the girlfriend sounds like she wasn't the brightest bulb in the in the box either, because here she is on the phone. She knows the police are listening, and she should know that he's not on the phone by himself when she saw that he was forcibly removed from their yard. And then she still talks about the drugs, or, she mentions the police are listening, that probably got him killed, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think she did it obviously on purpose, but that was obviously what caused him to be killed. I mean, maybe they were going to kill him anyway. We really don't know. I mean, the story that the person who we had as the witness was that they weren't going to kill him. They were going to trade him for the narcotics, and they were going to let him go. I don't know how true that was. Maybe, having a guy who's obviously in the drug trade kidnapped and robbed, you would think there would be some retaliation. So whether or not they were going to kill him really wasn't, he was telling us no, wasn't clear, but she did make a mistake that if he had any chance of surviving, it was over once she said, don't talk about that. The police are on the line. I guess she was nervous. There was narcotics in the house, and, the police were standing over her shoulder. So it was probably a nervous reaction. But so to get back to the story a little, we brought him down to the district attorney's office. They piloted him. They believed his story, and we felt that, that he was going to be a witness, and he was going to, be very instrumental in getting to a conclusion on this case. So the next day we went out. Actually, we was a day, 2 days later. I had my swing. I came in on a Wednesday, and we went out, Tony and I and a few other guys, and we went to the first perp's location, and we got him. We arrested him without an incident. And then I was processing him, and I went through the night. And naturally, with an arrest like that, just one detective goes. The guy from Homicide doesn't go down to the district attorney's office. So we processed the collar, and I'm coming back from central booking the next day, which was Thursday. Now, I went to work at a 4 to 12, a 4 to 1 on a Wednesday. Now, this is Thursday afternoon. Tony, when I get back to the office, says, listen, we developed information from that other guy. We think we know where the second guy is. He's got a twin brother that's also involved in it. We're going to go. Do you want? And I said, absolutely, I'm in. So we suit up and we go to the house. And there was a bit of a standoff with the second perp. We went. He lived over in Bed-Stuy, and it was one of those duplex houses. They're like almost like a short apartment building, but it was a duplex. So when we went into the house, the mother answered the door. And she was being a little evasive. We could hear some movement upstairs. And we said, listen, we know he's in the house. We kind of bullshitted her a little bit and said, we know he's in the house, And we started to yell up to him. We had guns drawn and everything. We didn't know if he was going to come down blazing. But we had a little dialogue with him for a few minutes. He came down. We arrested him without incident. We took him back to the precinct. He was cooperative, as the first one was. The first two were pretty cooperative with giving some information. And they had actually given us information on the mastermind as well as the third perp now. So the next day, now I go through the night again. Now it's Friday. I come back from central booking, and the third perp turned himself in. It was the brother of the second perp. So I get into the precinct, and now here's this, haven't slept in 2 days, and here's this third perp. And they said, listen, the boss said, you can go home if you'd like. You don't have to stay. You've been up for 2 days. We'll process the case. I said, nope, it's my case. I'm fine. Just have somebody go down to central booking with me, drive me. So that's what they did. We went to the district, we lodged the prisoner, went to the district attorney's office, go over the whole case, explain everything. And then I actually had gone to work Wednesday. I didn't get home until Saturday morning, probably about 9 o'clock. and they actually had to drive me home. I lived in Staten Island at the time. From Coney Island, it was a 20.
Phil, it's good. It's good for the people that are listening to understand the hours you work when you work on a homicide case, and that there's no hotels, there's no stipend where the police department feeds you, right? You're basically sleeping in a dorm, and if you get any sleep at all.
Yeah, there wasn't, like you said, there wasn't a lot of sleep. It was more of throwing water on your face, washing up. And, on the third day, which was the third perp, Friday evening, I was actually in the DA's office trying to tell the story. And when she would turn and start to type it into the computer, I was actually falling asleep in my seat. They had to wake me up a couple of times. But that's the thing I like about your show, Bill. To get off for a second, your show shows the human side of policing and specifically detective work. And you're getting a broad idea of what really happens, not what happens, how they solve a case in 1 hour on television. You're getting the human side of it. And I think Joe Fox touched on it a little bit yesterday when he said, he was talking about Pantaleo, how, a cop doesn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go out and, harm this guy or kill this guy. It doesn't work that way. We're presented with a call for service, whether it be a 911 call or a homicide investigation, whatever it is, and we just do the normal steps that we take, that the protocols, and however it turns out, whatever the results of these protocols are, that's how we continue on with our investigation. Now, obviously, safety is always a major concern. And
Phil, I just want to mention something from I want to mention some of the people in the chat. Ray Demora says, all is good, still living the dream. When are you going on the show? Gaspar Ramirez, what nationality were these guys, Phil?
You want me to answer that now? Or you want to?
Go ahead, answer that. Yeah.
The victim was a Hispanic male, and the perpetrators were three black males and one Hispanic male. And then the guy who turned out to be a witness, he was half black and he was half Italian. He had an Italian name, but he looked like he was African American.
And Inspector Joe Reek asks, did they recover the 2 kilos? What did the DEA say?
It wasn't the DEA. It was actually the ATF. And no, I don't think that the drugs were recovered. The way that it was said, he said something about a package in the bureau. They didn't understand that it was cocaine at the time when they were talking to the girl. And when Night Watch was in the apartment, they knew that. She says, oh, no, don't talk to police in the apartment. They didn't catch. Maybe he said there's a package or something like that. They never recovered it. We only found out about the cocaine the next day when the person who turned out to be a witness, when we figured out that he was the person on the tape recording, and he told us about the narcotics. So it was really too late to do anything. Obviously, the narcotics would have been removed at that point. But the Night Watch guys, I don't want to take anything away from them. They did a phenomenal job, but they didn't catch that it was narcotics when it was over. He started to say, listen, I'm going to send somebody for something. That's what I believe the actual wording was. And they didn't catch it that there was a package in the apartment. I should have explained that a little better early on. But so they never recovered the narcotics. And the narcotics were probably removed or whatever. And
yeah, they probably got rid of the narcotics. If the Night Watch guys didn't check to see if they were there, they probably get rid of them.
Yeah, the Night Watch guys, like I said, I don't want to take anything away from them. They didn't have the whole picture that we had only a day later. They only had, listen, a girl calling 911. My boyfriend was kidnapped. They didn't know too much about him. Don't forget, it was 1993. It wasn't like they could run a background check on him so quick and stuff. So they were handling it as an abduction. And sure enough, they did. They followed all the right protocols. They would beeping them, and then the call came in. So she basically said to him in Spanish, don't talk on the phone. The police are on the phone. The minute she said that, it was over. They didn't have reason to believe that there was narcotics in the apartment based on what she said. Like I said, we found that out later the next day.
Right. Now, and what was, as far as the prosecution, what was the, did you get the shooter? Did you actually have the shooter?
Yes. Well, like I said, I was up for 3 days straight, Wednesday to Saturday morning with the first 3 perps. And then the main player the guy who was the predicate felon who put the whole thing together, he actually was on parole, and we waited. We got in touch with his parole officer. We couldn't find him. We went to a few locations where he lived, but the parole officer had indicated that he was due for a in-person visit in a couple of weeks. So we pulled back a little bit, and sure enough, when he went in to go see his parole officer grabbed him, notified us. We arrested him, and we had a nice, neat package now. But there was a little bit of a twist in the case later on down the line when the prosecution took place. Like I said, we had made the person who was a witness whose apartment it was, I'll call him Chris. That was his first name. And so Chris was relocated by the district attorney's office subsequent to becoming a witness to the whole thing for his safety. And he was living elsewhere. And so now months later, I'd gone to the grand jury. We indicted these guys on murder and second-degree murder and all of that. So now we're getting ready for trial prep. It could have been 6 months, a year later. I go down to the DA's office. I walk in, and I had the folder with me. And who do I see? I see Chris. So I greet him. He's like in the waiting area. I say, "Hey, Chris, how you doing? How's everything?" He says, "Good, good. How are you?" So he says, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Yeah." And he had like a funny look on his face, like he was troubled about something. So I says, "Yeah, what is it?" He goes, "Can I talk to you alone?" So I said, "Uh-oh, something's up." So I said, yeah. I says, "Come with me."
Did you check him for a wire?
Well, I wasn't sure what he was about to tell me. But we take him into the men's room. I look under the stalls. I make sure nobody's in the men's room. And I say, "What's up?" And he goes, "Listen," he goes, when I talked to you guys that day, the first day, he goes, "I wasn't 100% truthful." So now I'm like, "Oh, shit." I said, "You didn't pull the trigger on this guy, did you?" He goes, No, nothing like that, nothing like that." He says, "Listen," he goes, "when we had him in my apartment, the DA asked me a couple of times. You guys asked me if I hit the guy or anything like that. And I said no." He goes, "But I punched him in the face once or twice when we were trying to get him to cooperate." I said, "Listen, don't lie to me. Anything else?" He goes, "No, I swear that's it. That it's been bothering me. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid." I said, "Okay, that's it. You sure? 100%? He says, "Yeah, 100%. I said, "Okay." I take him back in the waiting room. I say, "Look, don't talk to nobody till you talk to me again. Do not repeat this." So now I go in to see the district attorney, and "How you doing? How's everything?" I closed the door. I said, "Listen, we have a slight problem with this case, but I think we can work around it." She's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I was just talking to Chris outside. He made an admission to me." She goes, "Oh my God, don't tell me he shot the guy." I said, No, nothing like that. But when they had the victim in his apartment, they were trying to get him to cooperate, and they had hit him a couple of times. He claims to have punched him in the mouth, and he punched him once, and the guy had some blood coming from his lip. I said, "But it wasn't anything severe. He didn't break his nose or anything like that.
Right.
He didn't knock him unconscious." She's like, "Oh my God." I said, "Listen, that's what he told me." I said, "Let's talk to him. We'll work around it." So they bring him in. He tells the truth. They were like a little bit perturbed. She went to the bureau chief, and they said, "Look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to try and plead out the cases. We'll offer all of these guys, specifically the guys that weren't predicates. They offered them like 15 years to life, or 15. Yeah, it was 15 to life. And then the predicate, they offered him 20 to life. They wound up all pleading out. And then recently, about 2 years ago, I got a call from Brooklyn South Homicide from a good friend of mine, Timmy O'Brien. And he starts throwing some names at me. He says, "I got these cops up in Buffalo. They're asking about one of your old cases." And it was this specific case. It turns out that two of the perpetrators went to college in Buffalo. And this happened while they were.
Where I went to college?
Is that where you went to?
I went to Buff State College, yeah.
Oh, well, you might have been rubbing elbows with
It was part of SUNY, because there was the University of Buffalo and there was Buffalo State College. And a lot of New York metropolitan area students, Long Island and New York City, go to Buffalo State.
What year, Bill, were you there?
I was there from 78 to 80.
Oh, this is way before. This was
Oh,
93. Okay. They were on hiatus from school, I guess, summer break, and they hatched this plan to do this thing. So one of those two guys was released from jail, and they were looking at him for another homicide up in Buffalo. This is only like 2 years ago. That's why I didn't want to bring up their names, so to speak, because they may still be an active investigation on him. But he did his time. He got out of jail, and I was involved in another homicide up there. So that was one of those things that happens during a case, a homicide investigation that, made the district attorney a little uneasy. But thank God we were able to get around it a little bit. He was quite calm when we first started to talk to him, and that's what that really threw Tony a little bit, because, like I said, he was believable. And before I heard his voice in my head, and then him talking, and I put it together, he seemed believable. We were almost like going to take his statement and let him go, and then it just clicked,
Phil, when you said one of the perpetrators was going to see his parole officer, so we just waited till he went to see the parole officer. And I always found that to be amazing, that you'd get a guy, he shot and killed somebody, and the next day he went to see his parole officer. You're like, what is this guy thinking? He's just putting the wool over the eyes of the world. You know what I mean?
It's really amazing. And we've had occasion, I'm sure, to make calls many times through parole, or, we would notify the parole officer. Sometimes we would get information from them on where to find a guy. Or, like you said, the guy would just show up for his parole visit. I mean, listen, he's involved in criminal activity. He's not going to tell his parole officer. They want to keep up appearances so the parole officer isn't out looking for them. And I guess, too, if the parole officer violates them, if they get stopped or something like that, it's going to pop. So I guess they're trying to cover bases when they do that. Not too smart, obviously, but,
Can you imagine what it must take to violate your parole these days? You probably have to do a double homicide to get violated.
Single homicide's not good enough. It's got to be double or more, and then.
We used to get guys that they failed their drug test, they got arrested again, and we're like, "Are you guys going to violate them?" They're like, "No."
Their protocols on what their standards are for violation change from time to time, but I really think it's got a lot to do with who the actual parole officer is. There's some parole officers that had their heart and soul into investigations, and they were good. And there was some that were just doing a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 thing. And, they just covered their bases. I interviewed the guy. I mean, the guy could be falling asleep, obviously on narcotics, and they didn't note it anywhere when the guy comes in for a visit. Whereas if you had a guy that was really on the ball and say, listen, you're going to pee in the bottle right now, you're high, so. I mean, there's a lot of different things, but today, I don't even know what the standards would be to violate somebody.
They always had way too many clients. You'd say, You'd ask the parole officer, how many clients do you have? Oh, 150. How are you supposed to keep track of 150 parolees,
Hard to juggle. Same thing with, when we had caseloads, you're getting all these different cases, and then the clock stops with everything when you catch a homicide, because that's the priority. So now your other cases get put on the side, and you're trying to juggle a lot of stuff. Listen, back in the 90s, the squad was a lot busier than it is today. I'm not taking anything away from those good detectives that are out there today, but we used to do, back in those days, we'd probably do between 25 and 40 homicides a year in a 6-0 squad. 7-5, 7-7 was doing 100. Now they get, I don't know, 5 if they get that many, So it's different today. So, but the good personnel that we had, the caliber of detectives, really led to some good cases. And a lot of times, just being involved in it, you'd say to yourself, wow, I'm in the company of these great detectives. For me, anyhow, and you learn so much from every case. Taught you something,
Well, I think that's one of the reasons that the New York City detective has the sign behind you, New York City detectives, the greatest detectives in the world, is because when you get a lot of practice investigating crimes, that's how you get good at it. And that goes for homicides, shootings, anything. The more you investigate, the better you become as an investigator. So, if you get a jurisdiction that is getting 1 homicide a year, they're not going to be very good at investigating homicides.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's something I want to bring up that I saw on the news today that's going to really relate to what you're talking about. Now, they had a bomb went off, some type of an aerosol can or something went off in the subway. I don't know if it was today or yesterday, but there was a guy that was filming the whole thing right before it went off. Now he claims that, well, he saw, and actually a cop was going to throw garbage, or a transit cop was going to throw garbage. I think it was the Times Square station, was going to go throw garbage in a pail, and boom, this thing exploded. Now this guy just happened to be there videotaping this aerosol can that's going to go off because he said he saw it smoking. I know what I would do. I'd grill that mother because he might.
He's the number one suspect.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Now, that is from being in law enforcement, and most people would take that as, the guy just happened to be there and he videotaped it. So what? But we're not trained that way. We're trained to look at things in a different light, and that would be the first thing I would do,
Aaron Rodriguez, thank you so much for that 1999 super chat. You're so generous to us. Thank you so much. Yeah, Phil, it's funny that like when we think the same way, the guy videotaping that, he was suspect number one, and he would have been grilled in the squad. And I want to know where he was, what, who he is, what his criminal background is. I'd check his phone. I'd get a search warrant on his phone.
Just going to say that. Yeah.
Because maybe the idiot talked about it on text messages or in phone calls. And that's, people don't realize what police do in investigations. And that's investigation 101,
Yeah, absolutely. That was what I was thinking. I'd look at his phone. Maybe he had some dry runs or did ignited one of these things in his backyard, or maybe he's some kind of a police buff and he wanted to sell the video to the newspaper or something. So I would have definitely been looking at that guy. But that's our instincts. And I think Joe Fox touched on something last night. Now I'm retired. It's about 18 years already. And as soon as I heard that story, I immediately thought that this guy is suspicious. And I'll see things on the news sometimes. And I know it's a bullshit story when they tell the story, and I'll say, yeah.
There you go. There's Philly when he was a young police officer there.
Yeah, that was I believe around 84. Yeah, that was when I worked
on
patrol in
New York City. You were New York City Transit Police back then, right?
No, I was actually transit 82 to 83. That was when I worked in the 7-0. That was a year or two after I was in the 7-0.
And you got that green bar awful early in your career, huh?
That was a month out of the police academy. Yeah, that was in transit, Coney Island. I'm right down the block from the 6-0.
Phil, let me ask you something. When you go out to dinner, do you wear your combat cross with you or what?
Now, Bill, wouldn't you? Come on, of course.
What a stupid question,
The truth is, I wear this pin. I'm very proud of this DB pin from the Detective Bureau. So when I'm out, unless I'm wearing a tuxedo or something at a wedding, I wear my pin and proudly,
something. I had a couple of those, and not to brag or anything, but every time I got one, I lost it somehow.
Yeah. I was actually given this by Jimmy Luongo. Chief Luongo gave me this a few years back, and that was my second worst day in the police department. That guy on the stretcher with the bag over his face, the oxygen bag, was involved in a shooting that Louis Miller and Mark Alpino was shot. Louis was killed, and I was actually I went with him in the ambulance to the hospital. He was actually probably already dead, but he had been shot in the gun battle between Louis Miller and Mark Alpino and this particular guy and another perp. That was 1987, I believe.
Wow, Louis Miller had some reputation as a great detective and a great trainer of young cops.
It was just really sad. Joe Fox just recently did something on the anniversary. I believe the anniversary was about a week ago, and he had gone over to the precinct and he told a story. I actually saw Louis Miller 2 hours before he was killed in the precinct. He would come in with the rookies. We were going out. 2 or 3 hours before we were going out, because we used to do a 10 to 6, and he would come in with the rookies around 10:30 in the morning, and he would tell the desk officer, we're going to be Sector George. So you could tell George Henrietta that would be just Sector Henrietta, and they would go, and he responded to every heavy job, and that was a really unfortunate thing. And Mark Delpino survived, and unfortunately Louis didn't. But while I was with that particular guy, they brought in Louis was on one gurney, he was on another gurney, and Mark was in another room. And then they brought in the perp who was the main perp that shot and killed Louis, and he was shot. They brought him in, they put him right next to me, And he looked at me and he was like starting to say things. And he said, I didn't mean to kill that old man. And the minute I heard that, the blood just rushed through my head where I wanted to just pull out my gun and shoot him. But I took every ounce of strength in my body to hold myself. But I went and got a detective from Homicide was in the room talking to Mark, and I grabbed him. I said, listen, this guy's confessing. And the detective was Willie Rodriguez. And I pulled Willie over and I said, tell him what you just told me. And he repeated the statement to Willie Rodriguez, who later testified to it in court. And the guy was obviously convicted of the homicide. I believe he died in jail. His last name was DeChalis. I can't remember his first name, but he wound up dying in jail. And Louis succumbed to his injuries and received an inspector's funeral. The 7-0 at that time, there was Louis and Mark was shot, and then there was another officer killed, Bobby Machadi. Late, I believe it was a year.
I remember that. Yeah, he was a young cop.
Yeah. Yes. He was shot, I believe, in '89. In a 2-year period, we had 5 cops shot. 2 were killed. Machadi and Miller were killed, and we had a sergeant and his driver was shot. And then Mark Del Pino was shot. So it was really a crazy time in the 7-0 from like 87 to 89. I think they would 7-0 was the #1 precinct in the city for assaults against police officers. It was really hopping back then during the crack epidemic and all of that. In that picture, I was in anti-crime. And then unfortunately, that when Mark was shot, he was sent to the bureau afterwards, and then I went up to RIP. He was in RIP at the time, and then I went to the RIP unit. I went to the robbery unit in the 7-0 precinct.
You know, Phil, Jim O'Keefe, he asked me, he said, tell Phil hello. We worked together in the 6-0. Jim O'Keefe.
Jimmy O'Keefe, great guy.
He wanted to yell out to you, and it's one of the great things about doing this show is also meeting some of the people that we worked with again. Who was this famous guy in this picture?
Oh, that's my partner in all things acting in Perfect Murder. That's the great Phil Grimaldi.
Phil and I were partners in an episode of The Perfect Murder on Investigation Discovery.
Yeah. See, Jimmy O'Keefe, you just mentioned, he does a lot of television shows. He's been in Law and Order. He's been in Blue Bloods. He's been in a lot of things. He really is chomping at the bit with the acting. For years, he's been doing it.
That's great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I look like I'm mad in that show, and I look like I need some sleep or something. That was one of our other episodes that you were on.
That was a previous episode.
Yeah. I look like I got a little younger, so I don't know what happened to me that night,
Yeah, you must have been mad about something.
I don't know. But I tell you, Philly, I mean, I love these old-time cop pictures, and one of the things that of guys like us that were on the job when we were on it, we didn't take a lot of pictures because, you didn't carry around a regular camera with you. Now everyone's got a camera in their phone. They must have millions of pictures,
Yeah.
And I regret that because, it's like a great thing to see photos from, so long ago, and this is the kind of job that, 30 years go by, 40 years go by, and you see people that you were on the job with, and you always have great memories and you can have great stories together,
Sure. There are times that, like on Facebook, guys I work with will post photos, and I always say, damn, boy, I wish I had more photos of myself from back then,
I always had wished at the 20-year anniversary is coming up of 9/11, and I was there with 3 great detectives from the 2-3, Billy Hicks, Zedekiah Jennings, and Jimmy Zarakis. And I felt that day, I mean, it was such a crazy day that it was almost disrespectful to take pictures. So we never took a picture together. And I wished, like, to this day that we at least had a picture that just showed that we were together that day,
Yeah, I felt the same way too. It was kind of like ghoulish to be taking pictures down there. But, I think that there was probably a place for pictures to be taken to place it into history. You know what I mean? That you'll have proof that these things happened and stuff. But you didn't want to be the one. And back there, 2001, everything was with flashes too. Today, you could take a picture with your phone. Nobody even knows you're taking the picture, and it'll come out good. You don't even need a flash, So you didn't want to be the guy with a flash while they were uncovering bodies and stuff. So
No, definitely not. Stephen Gardell, thank you so much for that $20 super chat. I really appreciate that.
Stevie Gardell, good man. I knew his father very well, who was the treasurer of the DEA. And Steve just retired. He was a sergeant in the movie TV unit. I think you met Steve, if I'm not mistaken, Bill. I've talked about him. I don't know if you ever met him.
I know that you've spoken of him a lot of times. Yeah.
Him and his dad passed a few years back, but I was pretty close friends with his dad, who was a great guy. And Steve's great people, good people. I'm going to see Steve probably in the next few days for lunch.
Phil, Jim O'Keefe wants to know, he said, ask Phil if he remembers the perp who tried to escape by jumping out the window of the 6-0 squad.
How can I forget? Let me tell you, that was a good one. I can remember the cop who had the collar was Joe Smith. I think it was Joe Smith. Yeah. And now my desk and my partner's desk, our desks were like this. And right next to us was the cells. So he locked up some crackhead. He was an anti-crime cop. He locked up a crackhead, and he takes the guy out of the cell to fingerprint him. Now, like I said, our desks were like this. Behind me was a window on my side, and on my partner's side there was a window. This guy, now we're on the second floor. This guy decides to jump out the window. He just bolts, and the way that the window opened, it opened out. It was one of those like flip out windows, like a wing window. So he goes to jump out. My partner grabs him on one side. I reach over the desk and I got his other shoulder, but three quarters of his body is out the window. And he had his arms like this on the wing part that goes out.
You sure you guys weren't hanging him out the window to get a confession?
If that were the case, I would tell you, Bill. But now here's the thing: he's holding on. He's got his arms locked. The cop who was fingerprinting him is trying to help us. I believe it was Jimmy O'Keefe and another guy, Joe Shea, run outside. They're ready to catch him, so he wasn't going anywhere. But now we're trying to get him back in, and he won't. We couldn't get him in. His three quarters of his body was out the window, and then naturally. I jumped up on the desk and I did sort of a dot and del, so to speak, and we wound up pulling him back in and throwing him into the cell. And but Jimmy O'Keefe, I remember that well. A lot of good stories out of.
I'm sure that one never got reported as an attempted escape, right?
No, we would never do something like.
Something later on in the years that if you had an escaped prisoner, it was an automatic suspension.
I think till now that's the protocol.
It still is. PC sure. Kelly, he was adamant about that. If you had an escaped prisoner, you got suspended.
And the best part of it is a guy could attempt an escape and maybe get away through no fault of your own. I mean, if if a guy's handcuffed and you're walking with him, let's say from the police car to you're going into central booking, and you only got one arm on him. I mean, he hits you in bolts, maybe cracks you in the nose, your eyes tear up. He could get away, and that's no fault of your own. What did you do wrong, walking a guy out of a police car into central booking and he's handcuffed? You didn't do anything wrong, So
well, imagine there's been some bleeding hearts that didn't like the fact that people were handcuffed behind their back, which is the only way to handcuff someone. Oh, if someone's hands are in the front, imagine the mischief they could do with their hands in the front.
Absolutely. But I mean, listen, you could nitpick all of these different things, but Kelly, I don't agree with Kelly on that, saying that right down the line, escape prisoner, boom, automatic suspension. That's nonsense. If you're guarding a prisoner in a hospital and you decide to uncuff him and he overpowers you and gets away, that's one thing. I mean, you're not supposed to do that. It could be the fault of the officer to uncuff him. But I mean, there are times when I saw something recently, I guess it was Brooklyn North, where they were taking a guy out of the precinct to bring him to central booking, and he pushed the two cops and he took off running. He wound up getting away. I mean, two guys from the squad, and I'm pretty sure they were both suspended, but sometimes it's not your own fault,
sometimes even a doctor in a hospital can order you to take the cuffs off a prisoner, so that he can be treated. And
well, in that regard, if you think the guy's a flight risk, you get other people there and you say, yeah, I'll take the cuffs off. You get somebody else. I'm not trying a Monday morning quarterback. I'm just trying to say which would probably be the safest thing to do. Get some of the hospital police, get somebody else there. Yeah, I'll take it off. But, don't forget, too, you take the handcuffs off of a prisoner based on what the doctor's saying, he's liable to get injured or killed too. You know what I mean?
Right, right,
You
right.
got to caution these doctors. I'm not taking the cuffs off them so easily. I mean, unless there's other people present. But
Absolutely.
listen, that's a great. I'm glad Jimmy O'Keefe brought that up. There were some great people in my time in the 60 squad. I worked there from '89 to the late '90s, and there was really just some great people. And I got to tell you, the squad, when the bell rang, we say when the bell rang, a body dropped, or if it was a shooting or whatever, everybody responded. Everybody knew what they had to do, and we got the job done. And the quicker we were done with canvases, the quicker we were back in the office and typing or doing whatever we had to do. And it was just a great place to work. I hope and pray that it's still like that today. I mean, I know that there's great detective work being done out there. As I said, I had that conversation with Chief Harrison last week, and the job is definitely getting done by the Bureau for sure, and patrol as well.
In light of all the obstacles that the NYPD runs up against right now, they're still doing a great job. And hopefully more people support them than go against them. It's hopefully things will turn around. And this mayor who's been a nightmare only has 7 months left. Let's hope that the next mayor elected is better than this guy.
Yeah, as they say, don't let the door hit him in the ass, because he's Joe Fox. Chief Fox was saying this last night. The politicians that are in place right now, they systematically destroyed New York City, so to speak. I mean, it's not completely destroyed, but they did some real harm to the city and to specifically to the police. I mean, this anti-police atmosphere that's going on, defund the police, all of that. It's crazy. It's reckless. It's nonsense. It's bullshit. I could come up with 100 adjectives, but it's just really not the right thing to do. And I think the good people know that. That's why this show points out a lot of the different things we do, and it's putting some maybe positive spin on the good work that police officers, detectives do in the city of New York.
Well, thank you, Philly. And something, we're going to keep doing this show, and we keep
Absolutely.
highlighting the great cops, the great detectives, the great lieutenants, captains, chiefs that come on this show, because we want the people that are on the job to have a good morale booster, and the people that are off the job just have some laughs and reminisce about the way it was, and that's the way it was,
Absolutely. And one more thing that Joe brought up last night: even though you're retired 18 years like me, or whatever years you're retired, you're still, like, people say how many years you did on the job. I did 22 or whatever. But today, I feel like if I had to go back today, I could probably do the job. And it's like it's in my blood. It's never going to go. I'm always, just thinking in those terms, as a cop. I can't change myself, and every cop that's been on the job for a period of time acts that way, feels that way. And, so it's a good point that Joe brought out last night,
Something, Phil, is if you were ever the real police, you will always be the real police. And I don't say that everyone that's on this job is the real police, but the real police know who the other real police are.
I like that. I really like that. I agree with that 100%. On a television show years ago, I think it was The Wire, I heard the term, "Yeah, he's good police." And I like, when I refer to a guy, there were super cops, they're great police. And then there were guys that, like, I consider myself just active. I did the job. I would be good police. And then there were the guys that just showed up for the paycheck or whatever. And then there were the complete zeros. But bottom line is, like you said, real police, the good police, those are the guys that
Phil, I remember in The Wire there was a scene that the guy who was the light-skinned black guy, he was one time a homicide detective, and then they screwed him and he went dead. And one of the detectives was talking about him, and they said at one time he was the real police. And I loved it. It was such a great,
the actor that played Marlowe in that, he was the real gunslinger, real murderous guy. I met him quite a few times. I think Mike K. Williams, I think, is his name. But what a sweetheart of a guy. He's just A real nice guy, and I met him in Brooklyn at Spumoni Gardens a few times, and he frequents the place. And anybody ever asks him for an autograph or anything like that, he's a real good guy. That Michael K.
To
Williams.
me, The Wire was the best cop show ever made. And, there's a guy now, Dominic Lombardozzi, who played a cop on that. He's got a podcast right now.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
A good friend of mine who was a housing cop, became a fireman, was involved with Dominic in the movie that Pete Davidson just did, The King of Staten Island. Lombardozzi was in that as well. And my friend John Sorrentino, who's a retired fireman who was a housing cop, he also was in the podcast that you're talking about, and they worked on that. John wrote some scenes. He played a fire lieutenant and stuff like that.
I tried to get him on our show already, and his assistant more or less stroked me and sort of, I guess he don't know who I am.
We got to work on that then. I'm gonna reach out to John. I'm gonna reach out to John.
Yeah, he lives in Westchester, so it'd be like perfect,
He seems like a real nice guy too.
He used to work out at my gym. I used to work out at New York Sports in Hawthorne, and I used to see him at my gym. I'd be banging up 405, and I'd get a phone call. And I'd be like,
"Yeah." Listen, that was a great show. That was one of the. That's like Sopranos type, category. You know what I mean? That was a great
100%. show. Phil, I love you as a guest. I love you as a friend. You're the best, man. I think you should have your own podcast. You're such a great storyteller. But we're at an hour and 15 minutes. We have to say goodbye.
Okay, absolutely.
In the way of promotion, I just want to say one thing. April 6th, I have two of the greatest guests that I probably am going to have on the show ever. One is Tommy Dades, who's a retired first-grade detective who has a book called Friends of the Family. He was instrumental in putting away the mob cops. And the other guest is going to be a guy named Larry Mazza, who was a made guy with the Colombo crime family. And him and Tommy Dades grew up in the same neighborhood. And they had similar backgrounds. One becomes a cop, one becomes a wise guy. How do you figure it? But they're going to tell their stories on the show on April 6th. It's a Tuesday night at 8:00. So I just want to and Phil's going to do a couple of promotions for that show because he knows both of them. Yeah. And I just want to let you guys know. I'm going to do a flyer, and I'm going to let everyone know a couple more times before that. But for all you police off the cuff, real crime story fans, thank you so much for listening to my good buddy, Phil Grimaldi, who I'm sure will be on the show again because I love him as a guest. Maybe we'll ever be on another TV show together. I don't know. That should happen.
There's got to be something we could do together. This is great, but I'm sure I'll come on again. And thank you so much for the props. I really appreciate that. I mean it from my heart. I love you too, Bill. And to say that coming from you, I really, really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil.
Also, one last plug on that show that you're talking about. That is going to be phenomenal. I know both of those individuals. The story is going to tell itself, and I'm sure it's going to be great.
Larry Mazza, in fact, has a book out called The Life, which describes his whole life in the mob. And he did it all, and I mean it all. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for watching the show. This is Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, Bill Cannon, with Phil Grimaldi. Thanks for watching.
Good night, Bill.
Good night now.